When it comes to like the timing of managers and assessing managers, and then if they're underperforming, changing managers, how do you think about that frequency?
It's one of the hardest things in what we do. So a lot of research, like long-term research out of universities in the US and all that sort of stuff, do point to the fact that most people, including institutional investors, move too soon. And they don't see out periods of underperformance for long enough. So they jump too soon and often the manager rebounds, more than likely. And they often move to a manager that's done well and then tends to do poorly. Now, I know everybody sort of might make a joke of that, but there's enough research that shows that people do that. The reality is I probably then tend to think about that and go, we really need to think a little bit more long term. And sometimes that's probably not been the right thing to do for, in certain cases for us. Sometimes it's been exactly the right thing to do. But there's a balance there, and I think it's quite nuanced as well. It depends on each time. Each time is different. There's no rule here, right? So you've got to work out why they're underperforming. If it's just around style, we've had a really interesting period in markets where, and say for that decade from the GFC to COVID, even call it, right? So more than a decade, nearly 15 years, where we had QE and all of that sort of stuff. So volatility was zero, interest rates were zero, and growth assets went for an absolute tear. And the growth style just went crazy, right? And so the right decision through all of that period was to be in the growth style for equity assets. And value just underperformed consistently. I mean, there was a few periods where it did okay, but as a rule, it did quite poorly. I would think there's lots of people out there that would go, I've looked at the last 10 years of performance and value doesn't work, so I'm not going to invest in value. And 10 years is a good period, right? But it's not indicative of how value or any of those sort of factors perform over the long term. And right now, at the moment, with all the volatility in markets, value's doing quite well. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you were to sell a value manager because it hasn't performed over the past 10 years or not even consider value, you're actually probably making the wrong decision right now. And a lot of people don't sort of go, oh, what did it do in the 90s? That's actually relevant to now. But the reality is it is. So you've got to have a longer term time set. You've got to really, I think, spend some time on the research around this sort of stuff. The value factor does have value. So I think a lot of people have written it off, and I suspect over the coming periods that might be to their detriment.
Well, at Evergreen, you have an in-house ratings arm to help select managers.
It's not actually for managers in managed accounts. It's actually for things like private credit.
Okay.
So it's for non-daily liquid stuff that we can't use with our clients.
What are the criteria that you use to I guess, come up with that rating system?
Yeah, so that rating system looks at, as I said, private credit and stuff like private equity, VC type funds. So stuff that sits outside that managed account daily liquid type exposure that is standard for a lot of financial planners.
Why do you separate it?
Because we can't use those sorts of products in Evergreen Consultants. Because in a managed account, you can't use them. And they also need a specialist skill set. We've got a team of people who work on Evergreen ratings that have specialist skills in there. One guy's a hedge fund expert, one's a property guy, and then there's a couple of guys that can do a little bit more broader stuff, so some private credit, some VC, that sort of thing. We also look at things like agriculture. We've looked at things like water funds. We've looked at all sorts of stuff like that, right? So there's all sorts of things about those sorts of funds that make them difficult to do while you're also doing sort of a lot of standard daily liquid funds. So you need to spend more time on things like governance. Does it have an external trustee? Does it have an external custodian? Just those two questions. If there is a yes to at least one of those two, you will miss 95% of fraud.
Really?
At least. Because there's an external group actually looking at what's going on.
Wow.
So Madoff got away with it because there was no external group. There was no external trustee. There was no external custodian. Wow. So, those sorts of things aren't that hard, but, you just got to spend some time doing it. And those guys in particular spend more time on governance, people's backgrounds, past experience, and in things like private credit, looking at how they assess loans and stuff like that. So there's more detailed work. You want to be more careful on that stuff.
Wow.
On the private credit conversation, it seems like we're seeing a slowly rising trend of private credit managers having to step in and, I guess, become equity essentially and start running these businesses. I mean, the Rockpool example is probably one of the more notable ones.
Yeah.
How are you guys seeing these private credit funds at your ratings arm, and how are you sort of thinking about them? We haven't had an issue yet.
Okay. So none of the funds that we've rated have had a problem as yet. There's probably a little bit of luck in that, but having said that, there's also some, the guys spend a lot of time on it, thinking about how loans are assessed, and the quality of borrowers.
So not worried about the asset class, just looking for quality within the asset class.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.